Hello and welcome or welcome back to the Import-Export Hub channel, everybody. Bas Bagdan here, your host for the next 10 minutes or so. Thanks for pushing the play button, by the way. And guys, without losing precious time here with me begging you to hit those small vanity buttons, allow me to cover Indonesia's export dynamics for 2024. With a focus on the headings that saw the largest absolute changes in 2024 relative to the previous year, both positive and negative, while towards the end of the video, I will also show you Indonesia's top 20 headings that had the smallest variability in this 2020-2024 timeframe, with the coefficient of variation as a proxy in measuring Indonesia's competitive advantage, or at least part of it, but more on this in a couple of minutes. So first things first, in terms of absolute positive changes, in 2024, the largest one happened in relation with heading 7112. So we're talking about waste and scrap of precious metal, who saw a $1.2 billion positive change, bringing the overall export value for 2024 to some $2.1 billion, which is quite impressive. But if you ask me, what is even more impressive here is the compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years, which is currently at 14.5%. So quite interesting times working in this industry. On the second spot, we see structures and parts of structures, heading 7308, who saw a positive change of $1.2 billion. Most probably this is related to a big infrastructure project, if you ask me. While on the third spot, finishing the podium, let's say we see copper and copper alloys, heading 7403, who had an expansion of almost $1.1 billion. And these two guys is coupled with an impressive compound annual growth rate. And then the list, I don't know, goes on with cocoa butter, fat and oil. So we're talking about heading 1804, who saw some $1 billion change and almost $1.7 billion overall exports in 2024. We see coke and the semi-coke coal. Coffee is also present in this top 20 list with a positive change of almost $709 million, which is the largest amount by far if we consider this 5 years interval. Then we see what? Natural rubber, for example, so heading 4001, coconut, copra or babasu oil is also present with some $406 million positive change. Semiconductor devices are next with $390 million positive change and a rising star in what concerns Indonesia's future exports. While towards the end of this top 20 list, we see two tubes and pipes, so heading 7305, who saw a year-on-year change of $318 million. On the 19th spot, we have chemical wood pulp, dissolving grades, who saw a positive change of $314 million, while on the 20th spot, we see footwear with outer soles and uppers of rubber, heading 6402, who saw an absolute positive change of $309 million, bringing thus the overall exports from this particular heading to $1.2 billion, thanks also to some footwear manufacturers increasing their production capacity in Indonesia. So, what intel can we squeeze from this data? Well, it seems that the recycling business is going pretty well, at least if you consider the precious metals, with precious metal as an exponent here. Another thing I would like to point out is in relation with the semiconductor devices, whom, if you ask me, is going to be Indonesia's next rising star in terms of exports, a semiconductors hub, if you want. And lastly, one more thing that I would like to point out is the footwear heading, who managed a threefold increase in exported value in just 3 years. And considering that it has big competitors like, I don't know, India, China, or Vietnam, For the manufacturers who increase their footprint in Indonesia, this is a strategic move that is already bearing fruits, considering the current trade tensions. So I think that congratulations are in place for those companies who anticipated this trend. I won't cover here the compound annual growth rates or even the year-on-year changes, as the figures speak for themselves, really. And I don't know why, guys, nobody is talking about Indonesia's potential in the coming years. Everybody's talking about India or, I don't know, Vietnam as the next export platforms, where Indonesia, guys, is already there, and it is totally overlooked in the mainstream media. Anyways, I'm not here to give you too many free advices. Savvy investors know what I'm talking about, so I will be moving to my next sheet, where I will cover Indonesia's top 20 headings. That's the largest absolute negative changes, and the podium begins with coal, so heading 2701, who saw a $4.1 billion contraction, but still managed an impressive $30.4 billion overall exports for 2024. Palm oil and its fraction sat on the second spot with a contraction of $2.6 billion, while on the third spot, finishing the podium, is heading 7202, ferroalloys, with a $1.2 billion contraction. And then the list goes on with, I don't know, petroleum oils, heading to 2710. Telephone sets follows with a contraction of almost $560 million, which is a little bit worrying. Copper ores and concentrates is also present, so heading to 603 with a contraction of $357 million. Then we see what? Articles of jewelry and parts thereof, for example, so heading 7113 with some $235 million contraction. Biodiesel is also present with a contraction of $232 million. New pneumatic tires is next with some $194 million negative change, while towards the end of the list we see other paper and paperboard heading 4805. On the 19th spot we see brands, sharps and other residues with what, $124 million contraction. And finishing this top 20 list is heading 3901, so polymers of ethylene in primary forms, who in 2024 saw a similar contraction as the previous heading. And guys, following the example from the previous sheet in terms of Intel, it is clear that most of the headings are commodity related ones, with chapter 27 having 3 headings in this top 20 list. And let's face it, given the volatility in this type of business, it is quite normal to see these yearly changes, big yearly changes. But even though we're in a volatile environment, if we look at the compound annual growth rates for the last 5 years, we don't see worrying figures, except maybe for the last 3 headings, which are experiencing some structural changes. And I'm afraid that the trend is not going to be positive on the long run. Otherwise, nothing that caught my attention. So even though I'm covering here Indonesia's largest absolute negative changes, on the grand scale of things, there is nothing worrying. And I think that with this being said also, I'll now move to my last sheet, in which I will cover Indonesia's top 20 headings with the smallest coefficient of variation, basically represented by the ratio between the standard deviation and the average of the exported values, which should give us a rough figure in what concerns Indonesia's competitive advantage. And on the first spot here we have tubes, pipes and hoses, so heading 3917, who has a coefficient of variation of 0.0257, and some $57 million worth of exports for 2024. Milk and cream, not concentrated, follows with a coefficient of variation of 0.0406, while polymers of vinyl acetate is ending the podium, let's say, with a coefficient of variation of what, 0.0412. And then the list goes on with, I don't know, brooms and brushes, electric shavers, hair clippers is also present. While towards the end of this list we see medical, surgical, dental or veterinary furniture with a coefficient of variation of 0.0625. Organic surface agents is on the 19th spot with a coefficient of variation of 0.0627 and some $312 million worth of exports, while monumental or building stone, heading 6802, ends the top 20 list with a coefficient of variation of 0.0639 and some $49 million worth of exports. So, what insights can we extract from this data? Well, if we consider just these top 20 headings, it is pretty clear that we have a cluster concerning the plastics industry. So, chapter 39, who has 4 headings in this top 20 list, and some, what, $827 million worth of exports cumulatively. Then we see 2 smaller clusters depicted here by chapters 85 and 55, so electrical machinery and man-made staple fibers respectively, with impressive export figures for the former, while the rest have just one heading with not so impressive overall export figures, except maybe for chapter 34 here. So soap and organic surface active agents, who saw almost $312 million in terms of exports. So in terms of competitive advantage, as we see here, Indonesia is quite diversified with the ASEAN countries as its main trading partners. And looking at the compound annual growth rates, well, they are pretty stable, even though we see a couple of negative figures, but overall nothing worrying. And guys, before I finish this video, if you're wondering why we don't see palm oil or the headings concerning footwear or clothing, this is because I've used the coefficient of variation as a proxy, and I took only the top 20 smallest values, but rest assured that those headings are pretty competitive, at least for now. And guys, with this also being covered, that's all for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you've liked it. Don't forget to hit those small vanity buttons below this video. And as usual, until next time, keep your business safe. Thanks.